Hello, this is the nethero podcast. I'm Sumit Bose, and this podcast is all about business and doing better for the planet. It's not an eco podcast, we're not green warriors. We believe that business is good and business will make the difference, but it's about holding businesses to account. So if you're interested in what we're doing to try and make things better, to stop our polluting of the planet, to stop our global warming, to stop us driving around in cars that are polluting the air that we breathe, this is the podcast for you. It's all about business, it's about invention, it's about entrepreneurs, scientists, and frankly, there's a few wild cards as well. Do hope you enjoy listening to this episode, and make sure you subscribe and follow us on your social media platforms. And please check out our two news websites, energylivenews.com and Future Net Zero. On with the show. Don't fly! Don't ever fly! That's what they say. To be green, you should never fly. But frankly, that's bollocks. We all know that. The truth is that we cannot stop aviation. We've got to make sure it's cleaner and greener. And that is what we've been trying to do. Now, you've heard the term, I'm sure, of something called SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. But I didn't know that actually it's been around for quite a while. In fact, more than sort of 20 odd years. So why is it not taken off, avoiding the pun? Why is it that we're still struggling to try and make aviation greener? Well, today I have a guest who will be able to delve into that. She's ready to give you a safety briefing and everything is right. Is that right, Kata?
Absolutely. Yeah. Follow the lights.
Kata Syrup, have I got that right?
Cherub, that's it.
Thank you, from PA Consulting. Now, you are an expert on kind of the whole sort of aviation field, but let's just go back a little bit, because doing the research for this podcast, I didn't know, because we've been covering it on Future Net Zero and Energy Live News the last kind of, I don't know, 3-5 years maybe, but I didn't know that sustainable aviation fuel has been around for about 20 years. So can you give the audience a little potted history of how it came about in the first place?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll start with the first point. First of all, thanks for having me. Great to chat to you.
No, a pleasure.
A couple of points to kick us off. Sustainable aviation fuel is not one thing. Point number one. It's many, many, many different things. And we can get into all the things you can make it and how you can make it, which is a really interesting facet of it. It used to be called biofuels. And if you think of biodiesel, that's been around for a long time. Basically, all it is, it's a drop-in fuel that is made from an alternative feedstock to the conventional jet fuel that we use, which is extracted, fossil fuel, refined, and turned into kerosene. So it has indeed been around. I think the first flight was around 2008 on a commercial aircraft. So it has indeed been around. But you're absolutely right, as you say in your intro, it hasn't yet scaled to anywhere near the proportions that the industry would like it. It has been scaling dramatically in the last few years, but we're talking about doubling a minuscule number to become a slightly less minuscule number.
I get it. You look at aviation, and I said, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but the truth is, right, we need it, right? We need aviation. You've been in this sector for many years.
Absolutely.
We need it because not just for tourism, we need it for economy, we need it for trade. The idea of us flying less, we've seen it a couple of times, once 9/11, after 9/11, on the second time, obviously, COVID. Do you think the idea that we should be encouraged to try and fly less, although it's an admirable idea, in reality, it can't work, can it?
Oh, right. How do I unpick that? It's a very big question, and we could take it in many, many directions. The idea that we should be encouraged to fly less, not a bad idea. It depends who, though, right? Yeah. So I think there's a really important starting point, which is we probably have about 4.5 billion passenger flights this year, give or take. We expect that to double by 2050. Wow. It's not going to double in Europe. It's not going to double in North America. These are mature markets, and they've had their boom. They've had their liberalization. We all take many flights a year. There's a question about whether that could perhaps be encouraged to be moderated. But there's also a very different question about developing markets, the markets that have not yet had their middle classes enter the flying community, and what is appropriate for India, what's appropriate for China, Brazil, Africa. There's a completely different conversation to be had. So any sort of questions around what is appropriate or not, I think very quickly we have to be quite careful about pronouncements about what we should be doing in a global industry, because this is really important. Aviation, by its very nature, and the whole purpose of aviation is to connect the world, and it is one of the most global industries. So, not trying to dodge the question, but I think there is an argument for influence, and there's an argument for polluter pays principles.
Yes.
There's arguments around travelers and governments and industry contributing to their contributions to climate change and doing something about it. But that's quite different to your opening point about we should not fly. It's wrong to fly. I mean, it would be inappropriate. It would certainly be overreach. And frankly, it would not be desirable or practical to simply shut aviation down.
I think the thing is that people forget, that aviation, for all the things that you could see, right? You can see the trails, the contrails, they say, and people say, oh, look, the pollution, think about the fuel and all of that. But there is something that is very intangible, is that it brings people, like you said, the connection side of it. But also in those developing nations, right? My family's from India. The airport I used to fly to in Calcutta 40, 50 years ago was a complete toilet compared to what it is now. It's completely transformed the area around it. There's a new infrastructure. So these are the factors. These are the ancillary factors perhaps people don't think of, like you say, in mature markets, if we're flying from Heathrow or Stansted or wherever. We don't think that actually an airport can bring jobs to a community, can bring a whole supply chain. Are those factors as well something that needs to be thought about before we talk about the greening of aviation as well?
100%, both on a sort of a local economy basis, a global economy basis. There is tremendous value in aviation. It's not just the direct jobs, which it goes into the hundreds of thousands. It's the indirect jobs. It's the tourism and the trade that it underpins. I don't have the headline stats, but ATAG does an excellent report called Aviation Benefits Beyond Borders, which gets updated regularly, which gives very credible, transparent figures on the billions and billions of dollars of value that is created by this industry beyond of itself. The industry itself doesn't actually make a tremendous return. If you've done research into the airline industry, it's notoriously competitive, notoriously low margin. Only really the very best and most successful actually make any money. But what the industry does do is connect the world, support the tourism sector, migrant communities and businesses. So that is part of it. It does also make any discussions around the pros and cons quite complex, because you're talking about specific stakeholders with specific priorities. If I live next door to Luton Airport, just pick in London, the chances are me and many members of my family have some link to the airport. We possibly work there. We benefit economically. At the same time, we have the disbenefits of congestion, local air quality, of noise, and bigger picture of climate impacts. Even on an individual basis, that's quite tricky to unpick. You elevate that to, let's call it a national level, whether it's the Dutch economy or the Indian economy or the Australian economy, those get even more knotty and complex. And then you take it to the political level, which is often where these big international aviation decisions get made at ICAO. Then you throw into that geopolitics and competitive tensions and less developed and more developed. So, back to that previous point, economic and social benefits of aviation must be coupled with the very clear disbenefits of environmental impacts, other impacts, but it has to be a nuanced conversation.
I get that, but I mean, before we go into SAF particularly, this is another thing that people sort of have an issue with, which it's a very easy target, right? Aeroplanes and the aviation industry. And I'm sure you know that. I'm sure your clients know that. It's 2.5% of global emissions, right? According to the IEA, which is tiny. But it is one of those things, a bit like EVs, you see cars and crap comes out of cars and you go, oh my gosh, let's clean them. You see planes and the stuff comes out of them, you think clean them. Just on that point, that it is only 2.5% of emissions. And a lot of airlines, certain people, we don't even know who those CEOs are, say we get a really bad rap and we're trying to do a lot of good things. Do you think it's unfairly tarnished?
Honestly, and this is my personal opinion, that argument is so reductionist and unhelpful that I actually don't think, for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
It is an industry that is certainly more of what I would consider more of a luxury good, not an absolute luxury good. Certainly it's essential for many communities.
Yeah, absolute supplies. Yeah.
But certainly more of a luxury than, let's call it, agriculture, right? Everyone needs to eat. We need heating, we need power. Those are more foundational. So there is something to be said for focusing on something that much of aviation is discretionary. So point number one. And then point number two is it is 2.5% today, but I already mentioned that it's going to double at minimum. And also everything else is coming down. As the world does switch to renewables,
yes,
for the major pollutants, then by a range of projections, that 2% is easily going to become 20% if nothing is done. So we can't just keep saying it's only 2%, leave us alone. You are a visible industry.
Mm-hmm.
You are operating around the world, generating a huge amount of good, but it's not surprising that people are asking some questions, and we need to have some answers. And I think that's where I'm very hopeful about SAF. We do have some answers. We have a whole menu of answers. The challenge now is moving fast enough to prove that the industry can do something.
Yeah.
It's not something that needs to be entirely internalized on the industry. And I'm happy to talk about, where I see opportunities for governments and for individuals to help move in that direction. But just to say, look over here, leave aviation alone for the next 30 years. Let us get on with it and let everyone else decarbonize, I think is not palatable, frankly, on a global scale, particularly as the impacts of climate change will start to bite more and more.
Let's be fair. I get stories all the time. The news do get some. Airlines are doing things. Airline manufacturers are doing things. Planes are lighter. They're more, fuel efficient, and they're moving that. SAF. I want to talk about the main point of SAF, but just before I do that, electrification.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about battery planes. People talk about hydrogen. Where do you see those? Because SAF is basically swapping what we run planes on now with something else, right? So it's a bit like years ago we had leaded petrol, we went to unleaded. The car stayed the same. The plane pretty much will stay the same. Yeah. Have I got that right or have I got that wrong? Do you have to change anything?
I mean, broadly, yeah.
Probably. Right. So some people say, why bother? Why bother getting more fuels, whether they come from crops or whatever? Why don't we just electrify, or why don't we use hydrogen? What's the industry's view on those two technologies? Because I haven't heard that much.
So again, there's a couple of points to that which I probably want to pick up. One, both electric aviation, hybrids, hydrogen, fuel cells, etc., all of those completely new fuel sources, I think are very exciting and show some real promise. We are seeing test flights now. We expect to be seeing small electric aircraft starting to carry commercial passengers in the next couple of years. I mean, my colleagues were in Norway just a couple of months ago seeing demonstration flights. This is happening now. However, they are small aircraft and battery.
Yeah, they're always tiny. Yeah, like Cessna. Yeah.
Technology is currently limited, but it's developing very fast. And I think it's a genuinely exciting test bed for showing what is possible, testing things out and scaling over time. Hydrogen ditto, we don't have to go into the details, but then there's a critical, supply of hydrogen, the costs and the infrastructure very importantly needed. So let's park that there. Both of them have potential. However, if we think about the industry net zero goal to 2050, and how that aligns with Paris and the global agreement to try and keep climate change to less than 2 degrees. We cannot afford to wait another 25 years in the hope that we can replace a wide body aircraft flying between New York and London, for example, with 100% hydrogen propulsion or fully electric. About 75% of all emissions are on aircraft today and will be for the next 25 years, where current roadmaps of available technologies, i.e. battery or hydrogen, cannot replace them. So basically, our choice is do something using SAF, which is available today, on the majority. And the majority, it can be dropped into flights to Sydney, it can be dropped into flights to Bangalore, wherever you're going. It is a solution. It may not be the solution for forever, right? And by the time my kids are flying and grown up, I sincerely hope we will have true zero emission aviation. That should be the goal, but we need to continue on parallel paths so that we give all of the different technologies a chance. SAF's moment is now. SAF's moment may not be in 100 years, but certainly it's the best solution, best suite of solutions that we have today, in my opinion.
You say SAF's moments now, but you've done a report which shows that it kind of isn't. So I think you'll have the stats better than me, but sort of 90% of your sort of industry believes it's the future, but only 4% believe it will be a major player within the next 5 years, the 2030 goal. Why is there this disparity? Like you said, 2008, you said commercial flights. We've been writing stories about it. You hear about investment in SAF. You hear about KLM and all these brands saying, yeah, we're going to do this stuff. But it's still peanuts. So is it peanuts because, frankly, the industry can't get enough of the stuff? Or is it because they don't trust the stuff?
Oh, it's not a trust issue. So first and foremost, it is not a trust issue. There are very robust.
It's pure enough, because I know aviation fuel has to be certain purity.
Certifications, it has to meet the same standards, it has to be a drop-in, it's been proven in trials, we've even flown, you would have seen the 100% SAF flights. The manufacturers are working towards 100% SAF flights, compatibility in their engines. Trust is not the issue. The issue, which we also find in our survey, and you reference our report, which is a sort of global 600 odd SAF stakeholders, different parts of the world, airlines, airports, and so on. Trust is not the issue. The number one issue is cost, and linked to that is this supply and demand. Like if you make anything that is significantly more expensive than the alternative, then you shrink the market size. You know, I'm an economist, but you don't have to be an economist to understand that if something is 2 or 3 times the price of the alternative, the size of the market and the people who are going to invest in producing whatever that product is will be much smaller than if it's the very well established. Bear in mind, we've had the conventional fuel industry for 100 plus years. It is extremely efficient. Fuel production, not just for jet craft, but for cars, for everything else, has been finely tuned over many decades. They have the infrastructure, they have the value chains, they have the commercial models, they have the plants that have been operating and are, humming, essentially. You've got that contrasted with something which didn't exist before. It's a completely different value chain system, much smaller, much more decentralized. So then you're not comparing like with like. And that's really what it comes down to. If SAF cost the same today as Jet A1, we wouldn't have a problem. Everyone would be buying it.
So is this basically a moralistic play? So the people who are taking SAF are going to take a commercial hit because they believe it's the right thing to do. And the truth is, for the vast majority of the market, and let's be honest, it's us, right? The flight, someone says to you, there's a little green thing, tick your emissions thing, and it's a few quid, right? I tick it, but I can understand people who wouldn't go, this is my one holiday a year, it costs a lot, I can't afford the extra for that. And I haven't got I'm not making a moral judgment on those people. So, but the same thing can be said about airlines. Someone can say, well, actually, I really want to do it, but I've got very wealthy customers, they're all eco, and they'll be happy to pay extra 50 quid on their flights. Is that what it boils down to? It's us.
I don't think so, honestly. Again, for a couple of reasons, and let's take a couple of lenses. One is the individual, right? You and I traveling. The other one is the airline industry, who is currently being asked to bear the brunt of or making a commercial decision. And then I'll come to government. So on an individual level, I personally don't think it's appropriate to ask your person who's going on holiday once a year to voluntarily spend more. We know that there's a cost of living crisis, there's inflation. It's unrealistic, and we've seen for many, many years across all sorts of different discretionary choices. If you're asking people to offset their whatever the option is, they're not going to do it. They're looking at price. When you're making a flying decision, you look at price first, then schedule, and then you might think about your green credentials. There will be some, and there'll be more and more as awareness raises. But it's not realistic to push this down to the customer to make a voluntary individual choice.
All right.
Step number 2 is also challenging, but we need to recognize that airlines are voluntarily choosing to invest in this, which is interesting, particularly in the US. I was in Houston a couple of weeks ago at a SAF conference, and there in particular, where there are no mandates, nevertheless, airlines like United, like Delta, like JetBlue are making voluntary commitments to offtake SAF. Now, why are they doing this? They're doing this because they see that there is an industry goal, and they are signed up to that. They are making commercially informed decisions that are still consistent with their own shareholder expectations. And that's a really tough to balance, because for one individual airline, it's a really tough call for the SAF person in an airline to go to the CFO and say, hey, I want to add an extra 15-20% to our cost base overnight. Well, they're going to be laughed out of that meeting. It's not credible. The CFO would have to answer to the shareholders as to what they are doing. It has to make commercial sense for an airline. So unless airlines mandated to do something, or they can make a commercial case, and some are able to make a commercial case, and there's some really interesting models developing around that, then it's again a non-starter. So then we come to, well, if the individual's it's not realistic for individuals to either not fly or to pay more out of their fixed incomes, and it's not realistic for a commercial airline in a highly competitive industry where they go out of business on a fairly regular basis to potentially expose themselves to a cost disadvantage, then whose job is it to fix it? Well, who's left? It's governments, right? It's a market failure.
So this is it.
It's an energy transition in a sector. It's the first energy transition that we've seen. There are tools, there are blueprints. We know what works. They're all across the scale up, from R&D support to seed finance to loan guarantees to market mechanisms. It's up to governments to intervene as they see most appropriate, either at the national, regional, state level, or on a global scene. Again, there's a lot to unpick there in terms of what the possible levers are, but that's basically what it comes down to.
And so basically, what we've got here, and you've seen it lately with the Heathrow, extra runway and Gatwick and all of that. Governments have pulled, right? And so governments have pulled. So we all agree, and I think in your survey you've got here, I think, I'm just having a quick read of it, you've got basically the industry is saying that they believe it. 86% believe it's the best option to achieve decarbonisation. That's what you've said, right? And then of that, they see it doing more, like we talked about, it can do more, it can create more jobs, etc. But you have governments who have different pools, right? And can't just talk about the UK, but look globally as well. Is this situation now really what we're looking at is, and you've seen what's happened in America, it just takes a change of direction and suddenly things can completely change for everyone, which is worth billions and billions or trillions of investment. Are governments willing to take this step which says this is better for all of us, it gives guarantees to the market and then changes it? Or do they think, actually, should we be interfering? Is this really a commercial decision? It's a tricky one for governments, isn't it? Because mandating can create a real rift in the market.
It can. And it's interesting that you mention the US. Clearly there we've seen a lot of policy change at the federal level for for obvious reasons. What I found is encouraging amongst the chaos, and this does bring to life one of the things that we've talked about in a SAF context for quite some time, is that you don't have to move to SAF for environmental reasons. It's not just about its sustainability credentials. What's really interesting is that because of how SAF is made, they're smaller scale production facilities. The feedstocks, of which there are many, can be unique to a particular environment. You can use municipal solid waste, you can use cooking oil, you can use renewable electricity, you can use ethanol. Depending on where you are, there will be a logical set of feedstocks and over time a set of logical technology pathways, which achieves two other very significant benefits, potentially, as this scales for the local and national economy. One is create additional or different kinds of jobs which may otherwise be at risk or not exist. And this is particularly proving very interesting in the US. I'm happy to go into that, particularly in light of tariffs in agricultural ecosystem in North America, which is very, very significant. And then the second one, in geopolitics terms, energy independence, right? So if you believe that having control of your own aviation fuel, all road fuel and biofuels is important, and you don't want to be 100% reliant on the majors who control all of the major supply of fossil fuel, then there is an additional broader benefit that is completely separate, nevertheless very valid, for developing an industry that is more homegrown. And I'm certainly starting to see this with a number of governments around the world who you can be motivated by decarbonization. I personally maintain that is a very, very important angle. But there are also other ways that this makes sense. And when you take that system view, then actually the case for supporting scale up and creating the right market conditions, which is one of the three themes that we pull out from our Cacophony to Symphony report, is create the conditions, enable this industry to get to a scale where it is more sustainable on in the economic sense rather than an environmental sense. And then it should take care of itself. This makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons, but we're currently in that so-called valley of death. You've seen first of a kind. There's all the disadvantages, all of individual projects are finding it difficult to raise finance. But there's actually near universal recognition that the end point is desirable. The end point of having at least half of your flying fueled by one or two different flavors of SAF, which works with existing aircraft, is a good thing and people want to do. So what we're talking about is getting from this 1% very small volume to get to 10% SAF. I mean, the goal, 5% by 2030 is what we're talking about. Once you get into double digits, then actually the cost of production will start to come down. A lot of learnings will start to happen. We'll start to see some industry consolidation as we've seen elsewhere. So we can see where this is going to go. We're just in that really tricky bit. And what I find deeply unhelpful is people saying, oh, well, this is too hard. This is imperfect. We should just, let's delay the mandates another 5 years. I find that really counterproductive because it doesn't get the industry any more likely to hit its 2050 target. It just means it's going to be even harder when we get into the 2040s. Sorry, that sounded like a bit of a rant. No,
I like rants. They're good. Just before we end, there's a couple of things I wanted to pick up. So people have heard of things like IATA, which is the international travel. There's a manufacturers group, isn't there? And there's all of these others, right? You say something there which really struck me, which is that I can understand it. So say you're in the Caribbean, you've got loads of sugar beet. Could that be your fuel? So you suddenly go, actually, Caribbean Airlines can use that, and then they don't need to get petrochemicals imported. And I can see the real play in that. So if it's tricky for governments, could it be the industry says across the board, all the travel agents, all the manufacturers, all the kind of airlines themselves and the fuel makers, we've heard of this kind of I can't remember what it's called, Jet Zero, the project that's in the UK, but I don't want to keep it specifically UK. But could it be that the industry just says, right, let's just all do it, and we don't need to worry about governments pulling that lever? But that's the thing? Can you get those cats herded together?
Well, so I've already name checked ATAG once. So I'll name check them one more time because ATAG Air Transport
ATAG means, sorry,
Air Transport Action Group, and
right.
this is basically the industry associations as well as a number of industry stakeholders. It's a very small, but I think rightly focused organization that brings together the airline associations, the OEMs, air traffic control, right, and so on. And they have been very focused on all sorts of matters of sustainability for a number of years. SAF has been a particular focus. I've previously worked on a fueling net zero report that they do sterling work bringing this together. And there are actually a lot of things that the industry is doing, both at the airline level, at the airline association level, IATA also. They're starting to fill in these gaps and to join up. But this stuff is hard. It's really complex. And it also comes to the point of the aviation industry hasn't historically had to be experts in making and buying fuel. There would have been a few people who would have been the fuel procurement experts who may have moved from Shell or BP to an airline in that kind of role. But we haven't had a mixing of disciplines. We haven't had a mixing of the kinds of people who might be making investment decisions on a power to liquid SAF plant inside an airline. And so this is all new connections. One other point on that multi-agency, cross-sector point of view. So ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Authority, or organization rather, the UN body for international aviation, that also already is playing a pretty active role, an increasingly active role in the SAF space. And I'll give you a couple of examples. They have an ACT SAF program which focuses on developing feasibility studies, mostly in developing countries. So you mentioned the Caribbean; they've been very active in across Africa, looking at what's the potential, let's say in Ethiopia for a SAF industry, or in Kenya, and actually doing the foundations to help focus efforts. That's one. They're also standing up what's called the Finvest Hub, which is a bit further down the line, which is basically, and this is where rubber hits the road really truly, is there is capital that's interested in the potential of SAF. So you've got, whether it's private equity, venture capital, infra funds, pension funds, they see where this is going. But they are struggling to either find the right projects that's consistent with their investment requirements, or don't feel that the market conditions are quite right just yet. So the Finvest Hub is also playing a matchmaking role. There are other things that are sort of developing in other parts of the world that recognize some of this mismatch. And our report also speaks to some of this. It is happening, but this is all happening on top of the day job, right? As well. Whilst we've got hundreds of thousands of aircraft, millions of passengers every single day being safely flown around the world in a very fragmented, highly political ecosystem. So you can see why progress doesn't happen overnight when you've got hundreds of airlines, tens of thousands of aircraft in operation across 5,000 airports around the world. It's probably arguably the most internationally aligned and joined up industry. So I think it's worth also flagging that the aviation industry was the first one to set a global industry net zero goal of to 2050. Wow. So it's not like this is happening across agriculture. It's not like this is happening across the power sector. I think we need to recognize that the industry is not sleeping. The industry is finding this quite difficult for reasons that I've touched on, but it is committed to this goal. And there are lots of people really doing some exceptional work, often at personal or corporate detriment, and taking punts and recognizing it's the right thing to do. But this shouldn't be a charity gig. This should be a fixing of a market failure that then gets us to the collective right outcome.
What's your conclusion in your report? Is SAF going to be a player? it's just going to take some time? Is it having a difficult adolescence, let's say?
Yeah, well, difficult adolescence. It has to, frankly, because there is no plan B for the next 15 years. It's SAF or nothing, and the alternative is either policy measures that hold things back on it in a more draconian way. Let's put it that way, or it's societal pressure, or frankly, it's a growth trajectory that is going to be much more patchy and actually still bad for the industry overall, because it becomes more regionally polarized, even more politicized. So I think taking action and being seen to be taking action, even if it's baby steps, is the right path, and SAF has to be part of that. I think we are really starting to see that coalition forming. But we identified three, I think, very relevant, and hopefully this will have longevity in terms of themes, and this will mean different things to a fuel producer as it will to an airline or an airport. But essentially, what governments in particular have to do, and the rest of us play a role in, is create the conditions that make it possible for SAF to scale, right? So that's the first one. We have to get that right. We can't just keep wishing for conditions to be right. They have to be created. They're currently not, right? That's point number one. Point number two is let's focus everyone relentlessly on making it more cost competitive, right? And that, again, can take many, many forms. It can be optimizing your technology processes. It could be an airline being more creative in its procurement. It can be book and claim. And we could have a whole separate conversation on book and claim, how you basically separate the environmental and the physical attributes, but also give other stakeholders an opportunity to cover some of that green premium while it scales. And then the third one, which I think is perhaps the most relatable to each of us, is to recognize that we will not have things perfect. We are not solving for 2050. Let's just act now and then adapt as we scale. And that can mean me as an individual buying an offset for an interim period or buying some SAF. It can be an airline testing a small offtake agreement for a small proportion. It can be a venture capital firm just pooling some projects, doing something, but then recognizing that in 10 years' time, they may get bought out by a different firm. By 2040, we may well have very large pension funds running these as infrastructure projects where they're not yet comfortable. But adapting as you scale, and recognizing that is how it has to be, and waiting for things to be perfect is the surefire way of nothing happening. And then the naysayers sitting back and saying, oh, well, of course it was never going to happen because it was never going to be perfect. So I think that's the one that I personally can really relate to. Is just accept that this is going to be a bumpy ride, but still, strap in and get involved.
Bit of turbulence on the way.
Oh, there you go. You can't help yourself on aviation with the puns, right?
Well, I think it's time for us to land this podcast. So thank you very much for that.
Not crash landing, hopefully, right?
Listen, brilliant stuff, Kat. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much. And you've given us a real
enjoyed it too.
Insight into what's what. So hopefully 2050, I'll be flying, hopefully still flying then, but on a SAF plane, yes?
Absolutely.
Lovely. I'll book my ticket now.
Thanks for the chat, Sumit.
Thank you very much for your time. Ladies and gents, hope you enjoyed that podcast. Let us know what you think about aviation in general and SAF in particular. If you've got a view, get in touch on social media. My thanks to Sohi for production this week. Remember, if you want to be on the podcast, just email nethero@futurenetzero.com. See you in the next episode.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.